Welcome to another fabulous edition of Dan's Models. Happy New Year, Dan.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, and Happy New Year to everybody else. We're here looking at a really neat HO scale model. So why don't you talk about this a little bit?
This is an Athearn Genesis model of Union Pacific 844. And it's basically current form, or more or less. Excursion version.
Looks like what we saw in Stockton.
Yeah. This model is basically stock on the outside. I haven't really done anything to it. It was already pretty detailed, and I haven't weathered it kind of on purpose because, this engine's fairly clean. They keep it that way.
Yeah.
So I didn't really want to mess it up too much. I did. I think I painted the wheel faces on the tender so that they were painted in black so that they weren't metal looking,
Yeah, I remember when we saw this locomotive in Stockton, I remember being surprised at how shiny it was.
Yeah. So this model is factory painted, and it kind of has a semi-gloss, I guess you could say, finish, which I think looks better than if it was like super glossy. I never think that looks very good on a model.
Yeah, the real one was super glossy.
I know. Yeah. There's something about the scale effect, though, of that just doesn't seem to translate well.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a pretty nice model out of the box. So mostly what I did with this one was internal, in terms of the electronics and DCC and that kind of thing.
You had mentioned on the November podcast about an engine you had that had a whole bunch of extra stuff that didn't belong there. Is this the one?
Yeah, this is the one.
Okay.
This originally came with an MRC sound decoder, which sounded terrible. The engine ran terrible. And I basically shoved it in a box and didn't look at it for a few years.
It was that bad, huh?
Yeah. And in fact, I hadn't looked at it in so long that I actually forgot that it had any decoder in it at all. I thought that it was just, one of the ones that you get was just DC. But then when I went to, I wanted to put a Loc sound in it. And I realized, it already has something in it. But no, the decoder was, it was in the tender, and it was actually as big as the tender. I mean, this thing was a brick. And so between that and the speakers, it pretty much filled the whole space in there. And there was also circuitry up in here inside the boiler.
Right.
Which actually, as it turned out, screwed some things up, because the first thing I did was I thought I was just going to install the Loc sound in the tender like you normally do with a steam engine. And I did that. I had it all installed, and I figured out what wires were what in the front, and it was acting weird after I got it all together. And I couldn't program it with the Loc programmer. It just wouldn't let me write to it. It was acting really strange, and I couldn't figure out why. And the front headlight wasn't working right, and it was just like, what is going on with this thing?
You probably started thinking, now I remember why I put it away, right?
Yeah, well, it was like, okay, I already got rid of this huge brick circuit board thing. I fiddled with it, and then I also started to think that I wanted to make the marker lights work, and I wanted to have independent control of the number boards, because these light up, but they were just on all the time.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was going to have to look in the boiler to make that happen. I didn't know what was going on in there. So I figured out how to get the boiler off. And I took it off, and lo and behold, there's like another circuit board here and another circuit board here.
More bricks.
Yeah. Well, these were smaller, but still, it was like, and I think something about that electronics was confusing the Loc sound. But actually, it worked out to my advantage, because what I ended up doing was I moved the decoder up here.
Okay.
So it's now occupying the space that one of those circuit boards was occupying, because the Loc sound select is only about this big.
Yeah.
And that saved me a bunch of connections, because this thing has from the factory, has a 6-pin connector between the tender and the engine. And by moving the decoder up here, it basically allowed me just to use that connector, because if I'd had the decoder back here and I wanted to add all these extra lights, that would have involved like adding a second connector. So then I would have...
You'd have to have two harnesses.
Two harnesses, yeah, which is really kind of klutzy. So this way I only needed 6 wires to the tender. There's the backup light, that's 2 wires. There's the speaker, that's 2 wires, and then track power is 2 wires.
Perfect. Sounds like
So-
it's perfect.
Right. So all I had to do was rewire the way that the plug is configured, and then it was great. And then all the other wiring is contained in the engine. So that allowed me to make all these lights controllable. I can light up the number boards. And I also hollowed out the marker lights, and I can light those up.
Oh, that's custom, huh?
Yeah. Those were just solid pieces of plastic. So what I did is I drilled them out very carefully and put in a little tiny 402 size LED in each one.
Is that the micro?
Yeah, that's
the
those
super
really
small?
super small surface mount LEDs. Even a 603 LED, which is the surface mount size I normally use, was too big for that.
Mm-hmm.
So had to put those in there, very carefully. But I think it looks pretty cool.
No, it does. It's really neat.
And I also have,
Oh, look at that.
I had the Mars light working, because the way it was originally, the emergency light and the headlight, as it was originally configured, were on the same circuit.
Maybe that special decoder had some provision for.
It must have, because there was a little circuit board up there too. So they must have had some kind of custom way of doing that, because that doesn't normally work.
You don't understand, because it was built in 1950.
Yeah. So I got rid of all that too, and I changed it and put the headlight's now just a regular 3mm LED, and I also used a 3mm red LED behind the emergency light.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
And this engine, one thing I did, the engine has a smoke unit, but I disabled it.
Right.
I just cut the wires to it, because I don't really use smoke units, and I didn't want to connect it to the decoder because I was afraid that the current draw might be too much. I wasn't sure how that would work, so it wasn't something I cared about anyway, so I just cut it and forgot about it.
Yeah, I've never been impressed with any smoke units, even on larger scale.
It looks just like little wisps of smoke. Doesn't really look like real smoke out of a steam engine, and from what I understand too, it makes a mess.
Yeah.
It leaves residue on everything, so it's like, I don't want that.
Do you know what it reminds me of is when you blow out a match, and there's that.
That's what it's like. It's like a little wisp. So I had one extra function, so I decided to put in a cab light.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah, because there is an interior in there. It's just all painted black. I had the light and I had everything open, so I figured why not. And all I did with this one was to use a little piece of Kapton tape, and I taped a little 603 size surface mount LED to the roof. It was that simple.
Yeah. It doesn't show up because it's inside there.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
but it's a nice effect.
yeah. And so it's, it's not something I necessarily would use all the time, but, it's like, well, you got the function, might as well do something with it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's better than putting a little police beacon on the top, or fire truck or something.
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, an 844 doesn't have one of those.
Yeah. What's cool about this is that you have something that nobody else has right now.
Yeah, well, at least not wired the same way.
Yeah,
maybe.
someone has an 844, but it doesn't do all that stuff.
Yeah, well, there's probably a lot of these around, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I've sold a bunch.
That's what I mean. But they don't have the same functionality, which makes yours pretty damn cool.
Thank you. Another thing I did was they had kind of this goofy arrangement with the backup light where the LED, like a 3mm LED, was like pointing up at a diagonal like that. And then there was a little plastic insert in here that was supposed to carry the light to and it looked really not so good. So I got rid of all of that and put a 603 surface mount LED right in the lens. Mm-hmm. And now I think that looks much better.
Well, I didn't see it before, but the way you're describing it sounds lame.
Yeah, it was very dim.
What's up with Athearn? Do they have a problem with lights?
I don't know.
When they finally use an LED, it's all messed up anyway.
Yeah. Well, this model's a few years old too, so I don't know. Maybe I don't know why they do that.
Maybe they fixed it now. Maybe the new ones have something better.
I don't know. Most of their models still have bulbs, so I don't know. I was kind of surprised this one had LEDs at all, but it was,
Well, they're trying.
They're trying. Yeah. So I also replaced the original speakers. It had two 30mm speakers, and I changed it so that it's got two. It still has two speakers, and they're different. One is a 28 by 40 8-ohm speaker and a custom enclosure, and the other one is, I think, a 28mm square high bass speaker.
Okay.
And they're wired in parallel to give a 4-ohm load, which is what the Look sounds like. You can use anything from a 4 to 16 ohm load on a Look Sound Select, but they sound better with a 4.
It sounds so like you vacated enough space by taking the brick out of the tender that you could have had a full stereo system in there.
Just about, yeah. I could have put an iPod in there, made it play tunes. I put some stick-on weights inside there because I by removing that brick, it actually reduced the tender weight a little. So I figured to make sure it kept tracking the way it's supposed to, I added some weight. So yeah, there's pretty much nothing in there now except the speakers.
Speakers and weights?
Speakers, weights, and wires. That's all that's in there because there's no circuitry in there anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to run it a little bit here. I'll start the sound going.
So, yeah, it's a pretty smooth runner, too.
Yeah, it actually is a nice running engine now that it's got a good decoder in it. I wasn't sure how it ran before because the other decoder was so bad.
How does Lokesound deal with the chuffing? Because I noticed it was on the quarters. How does it know?
I had to sync it up.
Oh.
Yeah, there's some CVs you can adjust.
Uh-huh.
And it took me a while to get it right, but it actually is pretty accurate now.
No, I noticed that. I was watching specifically for that to see how...
There's two different CVs you adjust. One is the like ultra slow speed chuffing, and then there's another one that controls how the rate changes as it goes faster. And if you get those two dialed in, then it will actually stay in sync pretty well throughout the range, or at least as fast as you can notice. I mean, if it's going really fast...
Yeah, you would know anyway.
It's hard to tell anyway. But yeah, it works pretty well. The Select also does support using other methods like sound cams or a hall sensor or stuff like that if you want to. But it seems to work pretty well with just the electronic synchronization.
Yeah, no, it looked great. So
also the hissing that you hear when it first starts out is basically simulating the sound that when they open the cylinder cocks when the engine first starts to let the water out, and then they close them, and then it starts chuffing without the hissing.
Right.
So that's kind of the Lokesounds are set up to do that if you want them to. So,
well, another pretty cool model. I mean, like I said before, because of all the internal work you did with the lights and everything, it's really your own thing.
Yeah, and I like the way it works a lot better now. And I actually really like the marker lights. I think I'm going to try to do that with all my steam engines if possible now, because I think it really looks cool.
All right. Well, another nice model done, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah. See ya.